Most domestic violence calls don't come from hospitals. And when they do, it's usually already too late. But this one was different. Because the patient wasn't asking for protection from a stranger. She was asking to be protected from the man who claimed he was keeping her alive. The call comes in quietly. No panic in the dispatcher's voice. No screaming in the background. Just a request. Hospital staff at Altru Hospital in North Dakota asked police to issue a no trespass order against a man expected to arrive within minutes. They say he has a history of violence. They say the patient is afraid. And they say something else, something that immediately raises concern. He's her husband. An officer is dispatched. As she arrives, staff explain the situation in low voices, away from the patient's room. The woman inside is a physician. She's undergoing treatment for aggressive cancer. She arrived by ambulance 2 days earlier, and she has been telling doctors something they cannot ignore. Not yelling, not hysterical, carefully. The officer is told the husband has already been contacted. He believes this is a misunderstanding. He thinks the hospital staff is overreacting. He says he was just taking care of her. Before speaking with the patient, the officer leaves a voicemail for the husband. The message is clear. He is not allowed on hospital property. Not today. Not tonight. Not until further notice. Then the officer walks toward room 411. Inside is a woman who looks far weaker than her medical chart suggests she should be. Her parents are with her. And when the officer introduces herself, the woman doesn't hesitate. She says she wants to talk. Because this didn't start at the hospital. It didn't start with cancer. And it didn't start with an argument. It started years earlier, behind closed doors, with a man who believed control was the same thing as love. Before police ever hear her side, they hear his. Confident. Detailed. The kind of explanation that sounds believable, until you listen closely. Before the officer even reaches Whitney's bedside, her phone vibrates. It's him. Josh Temple. 40 years old. Home builder. Former military. A man who wants it very clear that he knows exactly what he's doing. The officer answers. Josh doesn't sound angry. He sounds offended. He says the hospital staff misunderstood him. That nurses overreacted. That this whole situation is being blown out of proportion. According to Josh, the real issue isn't abuse. It's competence. He explains that his wife is fluid overloaded. That he noticed it before the staff did. That he encouraged her to stand to help her circulation. He says he knows medicine. He talks about the army. About being a combat lifesaver. About saving lives overseas. He repeats it more than once. I love medicine. He says Whitney has been falling a lot. At home. At work. Everywhere. He explains the bruises before anyone asks. Low platelets. Chemotherapy side effects. Fragile skin. He says anyone in her condition would look like that. And then he adds something subtle. Something the officer notices immediately. This has been going on for almost 2 years. This is just another day for us. Another day. Not a crisis. Not an emergency. Just routine. Josh insists he's not hostile. Not mean. Not controlling. He describes himself as protective. A word that can mean devotion or possession, depending on who's saying it. The officer listens. She doesn't argue. She doesn't accuse. She simply explains that for now, hospital orders stand. He is not allowed back on the property. Josh pauses. You can hear it in his voice. This isn't what he expected. He tries again. Says he was with Whitney all night. That he encouraged her to stand to build strength. That she just lost balance. He mentions how bad it looks. How people might misinterpret things. I know she looks like a hot mess right now. That phrase lands wrong. The officer doesn't respond to it. She simply says she still needs to speak with Whitney directly. Josh agrees. Too quickly. Almost relieved. Because in his mind, Whitney will confirm everything. The call ends. And the officer turns toward the hospital room. Inside, Whitney Temple waits quietly in bed. She's thinner than her photos. Weaker than her voice on the phone suggested. Her parents sit beside her. And when the officer introduces herself, Whitney doesn't interrupt. She listens. Nods. And then says something that immediately contradicts everything Josh just claimed. I didn't want to come here. He wouldn't take me. She explains that 2 nights earlier she had to call an ambulance herself. She waited until he was asleep. She whispered into the phone. She knew if she didn't get out that night, she might not survive another. The officer asks gently, has this been happening for a while? Whitney doesn't hesitate. She says it started years ago. Before cancer. Before hospitals. before anyone was watching. She describes the first time he pushed her, then the second, then the pattern. Arguments that ended with apologies. Control disguised as care. Isolation framed as protection. And then she says something that changes the entire direction of the investigation. She looks at her parents, then back at the officer, and says, "I recorded him." The room goes quiet. The officer doesn't react immediately. She's learned that moments like this matter. Whitney explains that she didn't plan to record anything. She just needed proof. Something in case she didn't make it. She says the recording was made months earlier, during one of his episodes, when he didn't think anyone would ever hear it. She sent it to her sister, with a warning. "If he finds out, he'll hurt me." The officer steps back into the hallway. She exhales slowly, because this case is no longer about a hospital dispute. It's no longer about bruises, and it's definitely no longer about misunderstandings. There is evidence, and once it's heard, nothing will sound the same again. Welcome to Coziness Stories. If you enjoy calm, immersive stories like this, take a moment to subscribe and make yourself at home. She didn't hit record to expose him. She hit record because she thought she might die, and she wanted someone, anyone, to know what really happened in that house. Whitney didn't plan it. There was no countdown, no secret setup. She was sitting in her own home, weak from cancer treatment, when Josh took her phone. But before he grabbed it, she tapped one thing. Record. She didn't even know if it worked. She just hoped. The officer listens as Whitney explains what that night was like. She was exhausted, in pain, barely holding herself upright. Josh was already irritated. Not because of something serious, because of something small. A blanket. The dog had been chewing a bone near her. Saliva got on the blanket. Whitney asked for a wet paper towel. That was it. That was the trigger. The recording starts quietly. You can hear movement, fabric shifting. A voice, his, already tight with frustration. At first, it sounds like an argument. Then it changes. Josh's voice grows sharper, meaner. He tells her she's a burden, that she ruins everything, that he's tired of taking care of her. He brings up her cancer, not with concern, but as leverage. He tells her she's lazy, that she was like this before cancer, that she hides behind it. Crying doesn't work on me anymore. Whitney's voice is barely audible in the background. She's trying not to escalate, trying to calm him down. It doesn't work. He mocks her weakness, compares her to other women, doctors, mothers, people who handle more than she ever could. He tells her she needs to snap out of it, that she's pathetic. Then the tone shifts again, lower, colder. This is the part that makes the officer stop taking notes, because this isn't verbal abuse anymore. It's a warning. Josh threatens to stop caring for her wound, says he'll let it turn septic, says she won't survive it, and then he says something that freezes everyone who hears it later. "If you ever say I didn't save you, I'll make you swallow every pill of morphine you have. You'll be out of this world in an hour." Whitney goes silent, not because she agrees, because she's scared. You can hear it. The officer asks if this is the worst of it. Whitney shakes her head. She says there's more, much more. She explains what happened after the recording started. Josh got physical. He hit her with clothing, dragged her, threatened to rip off her bandages. She was terrified he'd noticed the phone still recording. She says that moment, that fear, was when she realized something. He wasn't just angry. He felt entitled to her body, her pain, her survival. Eventually, Josh gave the phone back. He didn't check it, didn't suspect a thing. Whitney immediately stopped the recording and sent it to her sister, with one message attached. "Do not tell anyone yet. If he finds out, he will hurt me." The officer asks the obvious question. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Whitney answers without emotion. "Because she's been asked that before. She was sick, weak, dependent, and he controlled access to care, food, transportation, doctors." She says every time she thought about leaving, he reminded her, "You won't survive without me." That's when the officer understands. This wasn't just abuse. This was containment. Outside the room, the officer makes a decision. She doesn't need to wait for Josh to return. She doesn't need another statement. This case already crossed the line. Josh thinks this is about a misunderstanding, about bruises, about staff being mad. He has no idea that his own words, spoken when he thought no one was listening, are about to become the most important evidence of all. And soon, he won't be explaining himself anymore. He'll be answering questions. If this story is drawing you in, subscribing to Coziness Stories helps you enjoy more tales like this every time you return. He says he was trying to help her stand. She says he watched her fall. And somewhere between those two versions, the truth left fingerprints. By the time Saturday night arrived, Whitney's body was already failing her. Her legs weren't responding the way they used to. One side felt numb. The other weak. She knew something was wrong. Josh didn't want to hear it. They were in the living room. Josh was on a work call. Whitney tried to stand using her walker. She asked him to help. He told her to wait. She didn't make it. Her legs gave out. She slipped. And instead of catching her, he didn't move. Whitney says she remembers hitting the floor. The shock of it, the panic, the smell. Her body had lost control. She had an accident. And that's when Josh finally reacted. But not with concern. With rage. He dragged her. Across the floor. Into the bathroom. She says she begged him to stop. Begged him to slow down. Begged him not to hurt her. Instead he yelled. Called her an animal. A burden. Said she was disgusting. Said she ruined his house. Then the hitting started. Closed fist. Left side of her face. Over and over. Her nose started bleeding. She asked if it was broken. Josh laughed. If I really hit you, you'd be dead. The officer listening to this asks one question quietly. Did he threaten you? Whitney nods. Josh left the bathroom. He came back holding cleaning wipes. Clorox wipes. And this is the part Whitney struggles to say out loud. He shoved them into her mouth. Art. Saying she should swallow it. Calling her a dirty zoo animal. Her tongue tore. Blood. Pain. Infection risk everywhere. She knew what that meant for someone with low platelets. Sepsis. Death. Josh says none of this happened. He tells police later he was calm. That he was helping. That he was trying to clean her up. That she bruises easily. That doctors don't understand. But Whitney's injuries don't match his story. There are fingerprints on her scalp. Bruising consistent with grabbing. Swelling on her face. And later scans reveal something worse. A fractured vertebra. She didn't even know it yet. After the bathroom, Josh suddenly shifted. That familiar pattern. The switch. He helped clean her up. Spoke softly. Acted gentle. Texted people saying he'd been by her side all night. That it was killing him to see her like this. That he loved her. Whitney even texted a friend something similar. Because that's what you do when you're trying to survive. You keep the peace. But inside she knew. This wasn't getting better. Over the next few days, her condition worsened. Explosive diarrhea. Weakness. Dizziness. Signs of infection. She begged Josh to take her to the hospital. He refused. Said hospitals make things worse. Said he could take care of her. Said she just needed electrolytes. Said she was overreacting. Whitney knew better. She was a doctor. And she knew what dying felt like. So she waited. Until he went to sleep. She grabbed her phone. Called 911. And when the ambulance arrived, she used her walker. Dragged herself to the door. And whispered the words that saved her life. I need help. Josh woke up too late. By the time he realized what she'd done, she was already gone. At the hospital, staff saw the bruises. Asked questions. Josh answered for her. Explained everything. Smiled. Played the role. But Whitney was finally safe enough to speak. And once she started, she didn't stop. Because for the first time in years, someone was listening. Hospitals see everything. The lies. The fear. And the bruises that don't match the story. When Whitney arrived at the hospital, the staff noticed it immediately. Not just one bruise. Not two. Bruises everywhere. Her knees. Her arms. Her face. Her scalp. Her back. Different colors. Different stages of healing. A doctor stepped closer. Asked quietly, "Why do you have so many bruises?" Josh answered before Whitney could. He said she fell a lot. Said her platelets were low. Said even a light touch caused marks. Said she was fragile. Said this was normal. Whitney stayed silent. Not because she agreed, but because she'd learned what happened when she spoke. Then the questions kept coming. Why fingerprints on her scalp? Why swelling on one side of her face? Why injuries inconsistent with simple falls? Josh grew defensive. Started explaining medicine. Dropped credentials. Mentioned military experience. Said he knew more than most people. But the hospital staff had seen this before. The caregiver who never leaves. The answers that come too fast. The patient who won't meet anyone's eyes. That night, Whitney waited. She listened. She watched nurses exchange looks. She felt something shift. And when Josh stepped out of the room, she told them everything. She told them about the hitting, the threats, the recording, the Clorox wipes, the way he said he'd kill her. Hospital administrators didn't hesitate. They called police. Not quietly, not cautiously, urgently. They warned dispatch. This individual has a history of violence. We need an officer immediately. He is not allowed back. By the time Josh realized something was wrong, security was already preparing a no trespass order. An officer left him a voicemail. Clear. Come. Final. You are not allowed on hospital property. You may not visit your wife. Do not come here. Josh called back, confused, annoyed, certain this was a misunderstanding. He told his version again. Said staff were mad at him. Said they didn't like being questioned. Said he was just being protective. While he talked, another officer was sitting with Whitney. And this time Whitney didn't hold back. She went back to the beginning. The shove in 2020. The punch to the chest. The sunglasses breaking against her face. She described the slow escalation. The isolation. The control. The way he framed abuse as care. Then she mentioned something else. Something that changed everything. She had recordings. Audio files. Saved secretly. Sent to her sister. The officer listened. And her expression changed. Because this wasn't just verbal abuse. This was terror. Threats to kill. Threats to poison. Threats to let her die. By the time the officer left the room, the case was no longer about a hospital dispute. It was about domestic violence, aggravated assault, and a woman who might not survive if she went home. Outside, Josh kept texting, apologizing, love bombing, saying he'd never let her down again. Inside, doctors were writing something far more serious. One note stood out, short, blunt, unmistakable. If she returns to his care, she will not survive. That sentence sealed it. Because hospitals don't write that unless they're sure. He thought the walls were on his side. He thought no one would ever hear what he said when the door closed. He was wrong because the phone was already recording. Josh believed control meant silence. Take the phone. Take the voice. Take the proof. What he never considered was that Whitney had learned to survive quietly. Months earlier, during one of his rages, Whitney did something small. Something invisible. She pressed record. Not to expose him right away. Not to call police. Just in case she didn't make it. The recording begins calmly. Almost normal. Then his tone shifts. He calls her a burden. A liability. A charity case. He tells her cancer isn't an excuse. Says she was lazy before it. Says crying doesn't work on him anymore. Then the threats start. He tells her she should be grateful he keeps her alive. Says she wouldn't survive without him. Says one day he'll let her go. Whitney barely speaks. When she does, it's quiet, measured, fearful. At one point, she says something that should never need to be said. You're making me want to end my life. Josh doesn't soften. He escalates. He talks about morphine, about pills, about how quickly it would be over. I'll make you swallow every pill you have. You'll be out of this world within an hour. There's no yelling in his voice, no chaos, just certainty. That's what made it worse. When the officer heard this, the room went silent. Because threats like that don't come from frustration. They come from entitlement. Whitney told the officer what happened after that recording. Josh realized the phone was missing. Panicked. Demanded it back. She stalled. Played weak. Pretended compliance. He didn't know how to use her phone well. Didn't know where to look. And when he finally handed it back, she shut it down immediately. That night, she sent the files to her sister. Along with one message. This is extremely dangerous. If he finds out, he will hurt me again. For months she stayed. Because cancer made leaving feel impossible. Because he controlled her care. Because he convinced her no one else would help. But the recordings changed everything. They turned words into evidence. Fear into proof. So when Josh later told police, I'm not hostile. I'm very loving. I'm just protective. The recordings said otherwise. And the most chilling part? Josh still believed he was winning. Because he didn't know. The officer walking back to her patrol car had already made a decision. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't burnout. This was danger. And the next time Josh saw police, they weren't coming to talk. You're listening to Coziness Stories. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story waiting for you. He thought the police were on his side. He thought this was paperwork. He thought he was walking away. Josh waited at home. Calm. Certain. In his mind, this was a misunderstanding. Hospitals overreact. Staff get emotional. Police clear things up. He cleaned the house. sat down, rehearsed his story. When the officer arrived, Josh greeted her politely, almost relieved. He talked about cancer, about sacrifice, about sleepless nights. He said he saved her life, said he put everything on hold, said nobody understood how hard caregiving was. He framed himself as the victim, burned out, misunderstood, unappreciated. The officer listened, didn't interrupt, didn't argue. Then she spoke, slowly, deliberately. She told him she had spoken with Whitney. She told him she had seen the injuries. She told him she had reviewed medical statements. Josh nodded, still confident. Then she said the words he wasn't expecting. "I'm placing you under arrest." The room changed. Josh froze, blinking, confused. For terrorizing and aggravated assault. His face tightened. He laughed once, short, nervous. "This looks really bad on me," he said. "Like I actually did something wrong." The officer asked him to turn around, hands behind his back. Josh complied, still talking, still explaining. He said he never threatened her, said she misunderstood, said he was emotional. But then, the officer mentioned the recordings. Josh stopped talking. For the first time, the mask cracked. He asked questions too quickly. How many? Who heard them? When were they recorded? The officer didn't answer. She didn't need to, because Josh already knew. In the patrol car, he tried one last time. He blamed burnout, blamed cancer, blamed stress. He said domestic violence was a ridiculous label, said real abusers were different, said he loved his wife. But as the car moved, the officer already had a letter from Whitney's doctor. One sentence circled in red. "If she returns to his care, she will not survive." That sentence changed everything. Josh was booked, charged, held, and for the first time in years, Whitney slept without him nearby. But freedom came too late, because the damage was already done. Cancer doesn't care about justice, and the abuse had taken more than time. It had taken her will to keep fighting. Freedom didn't save her. It only gave her the space to finally stop fighting. And that truth is the hardest one to face. With Josh gone, the hospital grew quieter, safer. But the silence didn't bring relief. Whitney's parents sat beside her bed. They watched the machines. They watched her breathe. They watched the strength leave her body. For the first time in years, she wasn't being yelled at, wasn't being threatened, wasn't being told she was a burden. And that's when the exhaustion hit. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that comes when you've survived too long. Whitney spoke softly that night, her voice steady, clear. "I don't think I can do this anymore." Her parents thought she meant the pain, the treatments, the cancer. But it was more than that. She had spent years fighting two battles. One in her body, one in her home. And even though one of them was finally over, the damage remained. The fear didn't disappear overnight. The memories didn't stop replaying. Every threat, every insult, every moment she was told she wouldn't survive without him. She asked for hospice, not because she gave up, but because she was done being hurt. Her father remembered the moment. She looked at him and said, "This is my last supper." There was no drama, no tears, just acceptance. Whitney apologized, not for dying, but for stopping. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep fighting." No child should ever apologize to their parents for that. She died weeks later. The official cause was cancer. But everyone in that room knew that wasn't the full story, because abuse doesn't always leave a visible mark at the end. Sometimes it just drains the will to survive. Josh never saw her again. By the time her case reached sentencing, Whitney's chair in the courtroom was empty, and the silence she left behind spoke louder than any testimony. The courtroom was full. The victim was not. And somehow, the man responsible still expected mercy. Josh Temple stood before the judge in a pressed shirt, hands folded, voice calm. He didn't look like a monster. That was the problem. His attorney spoke first, measured, polished. She used words like caregiver burnout, overwhelming stress. A man pushed past his limits. She told the court Josh had loved his wife, that he had sacrificed everything, that he had lost her anyway. She asked for leniency. The prosecution stood next. No theatrics, no raised voice, just facts. They reminded the court that abuse doesn't look like rage all the time. Sometimes it looks like control. Sometimes it sounds calm. Sometimes it hides behind phrases like, "I'm doing this for your own good." The prosecutor read from medical reports, doctor statements, police observations. One sentence stopped the room cold. There is no doubt that if she had returned to his care, she likely would not have survived. Josh stared straight ahead. The judge leaned forward. He spoke slowly, carefully. He acknowledged the cancer, the stress, the complexity. Then he said what no one in the defense wanted to hear. Domestic violence is not constant chaos. It is a cycle. And this court recognizes it. He referenced Josh's past. A previous domestic violence incident years earlier. A pattern, not an accident. He said Whitney's death certificate listed cancer, but then added, the physical and psychological abuse inflicted upon her made her final days unnecessarily painful. Josh swallowed. The judge delivered the sentence. 5 years for terrorizing an adult. 5 years for endangering an eligible adult. Served concurrently, followed by probation. It wasn't life. It wasn't nothing. And it wasn't enough for many people watching. Whitney's parents didn't speak. They just held each other. Because no sentence brings someone back. No ruling erases what she lived through. The court moved on. The case closed. But the questions didn't. Was justice served? Or was it simply documented? Because accountability doesn't always feel like closure. Sometimes it just confirms what was already lost. When a voice is silenced, records speak. Files don't flinch. And evidence doesn't forget. Whitney Temple never testified in court. She didn't sit in a witness chair. She didn't raise her right hand. She didn't answer cross-examination. But she still spoke. She spoke through documents, medical charts, police reports, audio files, doctor letters, text messages, each one quiet on its own. Together, undeniable. After sentencing, journalists began requesting records, FOIAs, court dockets, medical statements, and slowly the picture sharpened. Not of a single incident, but of a pattern. Doctors documented injuries that couldn't be explained by falls. Nurses wrote notes about fear. Administrators logged urgent calls to police. One physician wrote something rarely seen in a patient file. Returning this patient to her husband's care would likely be fatal. That sentence spread. Not online. Not on social media. Inside professional circles. Doctors talked. Advocates noticed. Domestic violence experts recognized the signs instantly. Because Whitney's story wasn't unique. It was textbook. A powerful caregiver. A dependent partner. Medical vulnerability. Isolation. Control disguised as help. And then there were the recordings. Audio files don't editorialize. They don't exaggerate. They don't soften. Whitney's phone preserved what witnesses never saw. The calm threats. The calculated cruelty. The certainty in his voice. Experts later said the same thing. This wasn't a loss of control. This was control. Even the autopsy told part of the story. Yes, cancer was the cause of death. But the examiner added something else. A contributing factor. Documented intimate partner violence. That line mattered. Because it acknowledged what many victims never get. Recognition. Whitney's work colleagues spoke quietly afterward. About missed signs. About moments that felt off. About how she kept showing up. Working, healing others, while breaking herself. She finished her residency. Passed boards. Practiced medicine. While being told at home she was useless. The records made one thing clear. Whitney didn't lose her voice. It was taken. And the system for once wrote it down. The most dangerous abusers don't look violent. They look helpful. And that's what almost killed her. After the case closed, professionals kept talking. Quietly at first, then more openly. Because Whitney's story exposed something uncomfortable. The system didn't fail because it didn't care. It failed because it trusted the wrong person for too long. Caregiver abuse doesn't announce itself. It hides behind routines. Behind medical jargon. Behind phrases like, I've got it handled. She's confused. I know what's best for her. In Whitney's case, those phrases worked. For years, doctors later admitted something difficult. They assumed the husband was safe because he was always there. They assumed consistency meant care. They assumed knowledge meant competence. But abusers study systems. They learn what words to use. What tone sounds reasonable. What explanations shut down questions. Josh knew just enough medicine to sound convincing. Just enough vulnerability to sound human. Just enough charm to be trusted. And Whitney knew exactly how dangerous that trust was. That's why she recorded. That's why she documented. That's why she survived long enough to leave proof behind. Domestic violence advocates pointed to this case as a warning. Not about rage. About access. When one person controls, Transportation and medication and medical decisions, communication, finances. That isn't caregiving. That's captivity. Hospitals quietly reviewed their protocols. Questions were added. Flags adjusted. Staff trained to notice when answers come too fast. When patients defer too much. When fear hides behind politeness. Because Whitney didn't scream. She whispered. And the system almost missed it. Experts now say something chilling. If she hadn't recorded him, if she hadn't reached the door, if she hadn't called 911, this case would have been written very differently. No arrest, no charges, no accountability, just another death attributed to illness. That's what makes this case matter. Not because of how it ended, but because of what it prevented from being buried. Whitney didn't just leave evidence. She left instructions. Listen longer. Question calmly. Don't confuse presence with protection. And above all, believe victims even when their abuser looks reasonable. Because the most dangerous words in this case were never shouted. They were spoken softly. She didn't live to see justice, but her voice outlived her, and it changed how people listen. Whitney Temple never wanted to be a case study. She wanted to be a doctor, a wife, a woman who survived cancer and went back to living. Instead, her legacy became something heavier, something necessary. After the sentencing, her recordings were referenced in trainings. Not publicly, not sensationally, professionally. Police academies used them to explain coercive control. Hospitals used them to teach red flags. Advocacy groups used them to show how abuse sounds when it isn't loud. Because Whitney didn't record to expose. She recorded to stay alive. And even though her life ended, her evidence saved others. Doctors learned to pause when a caregiver answers every question. Nurses learned to trust their instincts. Officers learned to listen for calm threats, not just shouting. Whitney's parents donated her medical books. They kept her white coat. They listened to the recordings once. Only once. Her father said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. She kept healing people while she was being hurt. Josh will finish his sentence. He will serve his time. He will say he's changed. But the truth is already written. In files. In recordings. In the quiet courage of a woman who refused to let her story disappear. This wasn't a story about an evil husband. It was a story about control. About how abuse survives behind calm voices. And how survival sometimes looks like pressing record. Even when you're too weak to run. If there is one thing Whitney's story demands, it's this. Listen. Even when the voice is shaking. Especially when it isn't. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is leave proof. Thank you for spending this moment with Coziness Stories. Subscribe, rest easy, and I'll see you in the next story.